It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Welcome to Boone and Crockett's Heritage of the Hunt.
All right, this episode of Boone and Crockett Club's Heritage of the Hunt podcast, we actually have some of our past presidents. We have Jim Arnold. Jim, welcome from Texas. And we've got Steve Adams, who is from Oklahoma. And you guys are part of our very small group of previous presidents of the Boone and Crockett Club. That's a pretty distinguished. We are currently on our 37th with Tony Caligari.
Correct.
You were the 35th.
Right.
And Steve, you were back in the early 90s as well. So we can't count that far back. But being a president of the Boone and Crockett Club is a big deal. Explain to me a little bit about how you got involved with the club and how you moved through the process to become a president.
Well, I actually met Bill Spencer, who was president of the club, but I was set up by another individual that said, "Hey, Steve, know you're involved in real estate. By chance, do you know of any ranch land in uh, western United States and this organization that where Boone and Crockett Club is looking to buy a ranch?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do know of a ranch in southern Colorado." And so I said, "Okay, I'm gonna fix you up, introduce you to this Bill Spencer."
Okay.
And so we met we agreed to meet up in Denver, and we flew down to Trinidad, Colorado.
Yeah,
And
know it well.
looked at a ranch west of there. But during that time, it was a 3-day weekend. We got together, and as it turned out, he and my father knew each other.
Huh.
And so that was very interesting, and so that became part of the conversation during the weekend. And he said, "Okay, coming up, this was in late summer, late fall." He said, "Okay, in December, I want you to come to New York City for the Boone and Crockett Club meeting. I want invite you to come." And well, I didn't realize at the time he was going to present me as a member or potential member. So anyway, that's what happened. That's how we met, and it was in 1985.
Okay. Well, and that's relevant. The looking for the ranch, what the reason have been was the centennial. So, right, the centennial of the Boone and Crockett Club would have been in 1987.
Yes.
And we did ultimately buy the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch on the Rocky Mountain front. So shortly after you became involved, that
Yep.
became the legacy project.
Yes. So obviously we did not
Didn't buy the Colorado
buy
Ranch.
the Colorado ranch, and which was fine because the ranch we bought was fantastic.
It is amazing. It is amazing. And we've got the whole Roosevelt Ranch radio, and Luke is out there on the ranch, and we talk about that a whole lot. So we don't need to dig in those details, but that's a really interesting way that you got involved for sure. Jim, what about you? How did you get involved?
You know, there was a gentleman, which Steve remembers, but he's since passed, but his name was Herman Bennett. He's from Brownwood, Texas, which is where I was born.
Okay.
And my uncle who just absolutely, he was a doctor he was a doctor till the day he died at 92 years old, but he just loved the club, and he introduced me to Herman, and Herman said, "Hey, you need to be part of this club. You need to be part of the organization." I had no idea what he was talking about. And I went to my original meeting in 2003, I guess it was. And the rest is history. You know, we just kind of fell in love with each other.
Okay. Why was it important for you guys to get involved in a conservation organization?
Well, mainly Bill Spencer. I mean, I didn't know anything about Boone Crockett, and I didn't. Meeting there in Denver, I learned about the club, and so that I was always interested in conservation. Well, I grew up on a ranch, and so I knew all about what you had to do to take care of ranch property, ranch game, or
Wildlife management. Yep.
absolutely. So I was kind of connected there, and so that's how I evolved. And And when Bill said, "Okay, Steve, I want you to become a member," I agreed to, okay, this I would be
This
an organization that I would be involved with.
this is something you can get behind it now, 30 years later, or more than 30 years later, you've been involved in leading the charge for us. Why was it important for you?
I guess I, like a lot of people, recognize Boone and Crockett as a records book, which couldn't be further from the real reality of what the club's impact is.
Well, and you're an official measurer, right?
I'm
Yeah.
we both are.
Oh, that's right, Steve. You are as well. Yes.
Right.
And as I started down the path of going to the meetings that Herman's invited and starting to see the bigger picture of what the club does, and started to realize it's people like us that's responsible for what the future holds. Wildlife don't take care of themselves very well. We have to do a good job of making sure we manage the growth of populations through corridors, through just a multitude of challenges that we all have. And then as the time evolved with that, realized, what the university programs piece of it, which I think we should probably talk about a little bit.
Sure.
What more, it's just so much more than just a records. The records is the tip of the iceberg. And to me, it's the ultimate result of all the other work that goes on. And I think that's the critical message that you got to get to people that, can you take care of themselves? And especially when you got situations with growing population and diminishing open landscapes, you got to find a way to make it all fit.
Yeah.
And I think the bison is probably the most beautiful example of all. Early on in life, it was almost gone.
Yeah.
Today, they're back pretty successful in many areas. That may be the extreme, but it's reality. It's everything falls in that same scenario, whether it's fish or ducks or whatever. And I think that's what the club has done so beautifully, is figured out how to fit it all into a model that makes sense and works for the American people.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously that's been who the club is from the very beginning. It is being involved through leaders in the community like yourselves can make an impact, talking to a member of Congress or through your contributions, both voluntary or financial, or connecting the dots between people that make a difference on the ground. And that's how we brought wildlife back and created a sustainable thing where our measuring system can record the success of that, and it all very much
That's
ties
correct.
together.
Right.
And I would also say, you mentioned Congress, because, I was encouraged by some of our leadership to get involved in Washington, D.C. previous to becoming president. I never really gave it a whole lot of thought because I'm just a poor old Texas redneck, and I never dreamed myself ever walking on Capitol Hill. But when you get there, you realize that, the decisions that the gentlemen make that are sitting in Congress or Senate positions, the only knowledge they have in many topics are knowledge that we give to them. And either through them directly or through some of their aides, you have to get that message to them. But more importantly, you got to make them understand why the decisions they make have an impact on the future. And that's our job. Steve and I,
There we go.
we're not, our hunting days are pretty much behind us, but we got a lot of kids and grandkids, and critically important for me to make sure that's part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you got involved in the mid 80s through the ranch and then became a member. And so tell me what it was like when you were president and when you were first coming up through the club, and some of the priorities that were going on. Obviously, the centennial was a big thing at that time, but what types of issues were you dealing with at that point?
Well, I'll tell you, mainly at that point, it was the moving of the headquarters of the club to Missoula
Okay.
from Washington area. And so that was a major aspect.
Absolutely.
And but again, the ranch. One of my first jobs again that Bill Spencer said. What I became the chairman of the ranch management committee,
Okay.
and so because I okay, that would be great. So I spent a lot of time on the ranch, and it was again back in the 80s. I mean, that was there's a lot going on there, and then there was actually not a lot going on because things were starting to evolve, and how do we use the ranch to part of Boone and Crockett? Now, how does it become? What are the main aspects and so forth? So there's a lot of good things going on at that time, but it was very very young, very beginning.
For sure. And I know a lot of people don't fully realize we don't have a huge staff with
Yep.
Boone and Crockett Club compared to a lot of organizations. And back then, not very much at all. I mean, that building, well, not building, we have a headquarters that is the old Milwaukee Depot, which is a National Historic Registry building. It's a beautiful, we
Right.
talked about, Tony and I talked about it in our launch episode. So it was an amazing place for us to park permanently, or at least for the time have been there since now, 30 years. But at the time, there wasn't a huge staff that was helping the operations of the organization. So that was a big time of growth for the organization.
Yeah, it was a growth, and the building was be renovated, and a lot of going on outside and inside. So there was just you started with just a lot of that beginning was going on for that stand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's kind of funny to say that. It's a 138-year-old organization now. At that time, it was 100 years old. You're like, why? What do you mean you're just beginning? That's a long time for an organization to be around. So there is a lot of growth and change that has to go on and continues to this day,
Yep.
where there are adaptations that have to be made to be based on the time. But that was a big leap for the organization to have a permanent headquarters, to be able to have the ranch, which has become this education center and land stewardship teaching area. And that's a pretty instrumental time. So we moved into the late 90s, and I know you were both members at that point. Jim, you and I were talking about this earlier.
2004 for me.
You were 2004. One of the big things that the club was involved with was the American Wildlife Conservation Partners, and that happened in 2000. That was, and that happened at the club's headquarters, where you have all of the organizations that had involvement. And this is actually in the early stages of my conservation career. I remember this vividly when this was going down, and bringing those leaders from all of the hunting conservation organizations to get together to work on that. And that was hosted at our headquarters in the year 2000.
Dan Pedrati was the president at that time, and he was really very instrumental in putting that together.
Well, I think Dan's vision there, and I know Dan, we both know Dan well, super guy, great leader. And I think, as you said, his vision was to say that, no club, no group, whether you're mule deer or your elk or your trout unlimited or whatever it is, nobody can do it all. And his vision was to say, hey, look, the bigger the reach, the better the strength. And by putting AWCP together and orchestrating, I think if you really look at it hard, AWCP has so much upside, even to this day, that we can do better. The biggest challenge there is always everybody's got their own agendas. So you've got to figure out priorities, and you got to figure out how to fit them together and form some kind of collective force. Whether it's Washington, D.C., which is certainly a big piece of it, but there's certainly clubs that do things a lot better than others. And I'll include Boone and Crockett in the mix, but I think AWCP and our current CEO was chairman a couple of years ago and did a fabulous job. But the goal there is try to make everybody have at least a common vision in a lot of ways. And I think AWCP allowed. I mean, just like CSF is the best that there is when it comes to working on the Hill. That's what they do.
Yep.
And we do part of it, yes. But do we support them? That's because that's Jeff Clinton and his team. It's a great partnership. And there are a lot more than just that one.
Absolutely.
If you look at the support that we have in some of our events, and we support majority of those other guys' events. And I think the purpose is to get the message out and try to make it a common thing, because we're all in here for the same goal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think some of those relationships and partnerships through an AWCP, where you can, and your Wildlife for the 21st Century is the report that we have done through AWCP since the beginning. And the intention of that has been to create a direction, a wildlife and hunting policy direction for the new administration and Congresses. And it was prior to the last election, we released volume 7 of Wildlife for the 21st Century. And I was very involved with writing that, because the club is still instrumental in that process. And to bring those groups together to talk about that is a challenge. And it's exciting. And we're now over 50 organizations in that. And it started at our headquarters.
Well, you think about that. I mean, it's certainly not a bad thing. But all of it takes dollars.
Yeah.
All it takes dollars. And every organization is faced with the same challenge. And in many cases, we're diving in the same pool.
Yeah.
And so that's where some of the friction, not necessarily friction, but challenges come from.
Sure.
Right.
Because, we're all trying to fund initiatives and there's only so much to go around. Working together is so much better than pulling apart.
Absolutely. Okay, so that happened in 2000, and you became a member in 2004.
That's correct.
And then it was in 2020 that you were president, right? Or roughly so. But what was your involvement in the club during that time shortly after you became a member? What were you involved in?
Well, I'm a Texas boy who grew up with my grandfather a rancher, so the ranch committee was the first thing I really done.
Oh, interesting.
And met some people there and tried to learn. And I guess the biggest thing I had to do was trying to learn the bigger pieces of the club. Today's world, we got a lot more committees that we address different things. So
Right.
when we have our annual meeting, you can sit in and start learning. I guess the better way I put it. But in the early go, it was I want to be on records, which I took the class in 2004, as we recognize today, and then of course the ranch committee was what I really wanted to be on. So those two are the places that I started, and then I got involved with Ben Wallace because and Ben was just a great mentor to me, and he was president. I guess two presidents or three presidents, no more than that, before me, quite a few. But he encouraged me to get deeply involved, and so I started with VP of administration, and between there and the end of presidency was a 10-year run. And I challenge anybody that it's a lot to learn.
It's a lot to learn.
And
And it's a lot of time.
You
It-
think
It's
it's
all,
easy on hope.
it's all volunteer. You guys are all volunteer. It's
That pays so well.
We'd argue the same thing. It's all good though, because what are we doing? We're all working for a common purpose.
That
And,
we're all working for
and
time.
there's so much commitment and passion for that.
The club is very heavily funded by its existing membership.
Absolutely.
I mean, we get a lot of support from suppliers, no question, not necessarily suppliers, but supporters, but I think the big chunk of what we do is funded internally.
Yeah, certainly a lot of generosity of both time, treasure, and talent within
It's
the
amazing.
rank. And that's from the regular member ranks of those 100. That was the Theodore Roosevelt vision, as well as our professional members as well. And the professional members who were 150, 160 members or whatever.
Right.
And you were talking about the committee process. We have committees working on certain areas. We have conservation policy, we have records, we have communications, which I'm the staff liaison to. And that's how those members work together and interact to drive the direction of the organization.
University program.
University programs. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. That got underway right around the same time that the headquarters, right? Is that because you endowed a professor at the University of Montana at that time?
Involved with the ranch operation. I mean, that
It
was
was all tied together.
that's exactly right.
Interesting. And that was so that was in the mid 90s. Was that Jack Thomas? Was he the first, or was there
Ward Thomas.
Jack
So
Ward
Jack
Thomas?
Ward.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Yeah, then that's quite a statement to get somebody like a Jack Ward Thomas as your
He's my hero.
he's a special person. So fun story. My dad, it was a professor of wildlife, and he and Jack knew each other. So I first got to know him in the early 80s when I was young high, out in Oregon at the Starkey program when he was working there. So I knew him as a close personal family friend, and he was a dear person.
Right.
So the university programs, the concept of that is we have young people coming up into the wildlife conservation field, and we'll dig in more detail on this in another podcast when we get some of our university programs folks on board. But the idea is that you've got people coming into wildlife, and the ability to tie in that hunting heritage, the policy, all of the different aspects that are important to the club through our priorities organizationally. If we're helping young people get started and get a direction, that network, the skills and resources, that was the vision behind that program.
Absolutely.
And I think that's evolved
Yeah.
a lot too, because somewhere along the way,
And we're gonna stop and let that.
what it do?
Brian, you're good. Do you can we turn it off so it doesn't go again, or
Mine's off.
just is there a button?
There-
There you go. Turn it on. Do not disturb. Turn down the volume. There you go.
Yeah.
I know mine's silent, but that doesn't mean it won't buzz.
That's all right.
There you go.
Okay, so we were talking university programs. We were talking about, so we'll just
We'll pick that up.
give us a second.
Yep.
Get this put down, and we'll just check in there. About Jack, we had talked about. So so the university programs is important to bring in young people who understand and can connect the dots. Is that the vision?
Well, I think early on it was more the wildlife side of things. And as it evolved, and I think a lot of it evolved on the policy front when Bill Demicane evolved as president, which was multiple presidents before me. And Bill was a very strong Michigan State guy. And then they kind of worked through the fact that, hey, the policymakers are making the rules to what happens to all of us, no matter what it is. And there's a million different topics when it comes to that regard. But I think nowadays we're with several of our programs, they are diverse in their approach to things. Some are purely wildlife, some are a lot more research, and then there's others like Texas A&M and Michigan State that are trying to develop a policy piece along with the wildlife piece. So when those people get to Washington D.C., they have a really strong background of what it means, what some of these decisions mean to wildlife and to landscape.
No, and that's important. It's again being a career professional in the wildlife community to have a focus on policy is important. As you said, that's where the rubber hits the road. But if you don't then also understand the implications of what those decisions will make on the landscape, so having well-trained wildlife managers was one of the earliest functions or priorities of the club and others in the wildlife community. Aldo Leopold and others with the becoming professional wildlife managers was a big deal in the 1930s, and club members were really involved in that at that time. So we become really good wildlife managers, and then obviously the public and social side. So it's adaptive of what we need to do as wildlife professionals, as conservationists, and being able to integrate into the whole
Yep.
and bring those students along in that pathway.
Very well described. Yeah.
Well, I think early on it was almost 100% policy because we had the Vanishing Game of the West.
Absolutely.
And then after that kind of changed, then it became a different model. And now it's kind of going back to where we really have an even model that really works on both sides of the fence. What's good with wildlife, like CWD and some of those types of disease challenges, And then on the flip side of that is the decision makers, making sure that when they make those decisions in Washington, they're well informed of what the impacts potentially be. And when the club we bring in the research people, we bring in the data, we sit down with them and say, look, here's where we are. And I would say it's had a tremendous impact.
I would think so.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, let's fast forward a little bit more. Like I said, 2020-ish was when you were there. So you were the president during COVID.
No,
No,
actually,
that was Tim Brady. That was Tim Brady. That's right. Okay, so you were immediately afterwards, which obviously that was a challenging time for the organization, as with many organizations. You had to pick up the pieces then.
Well, I don't know, pick up pieces and right.
That's true. Well,
I don't think we'll completely can't.
Not for our organization,
No.
not for a number of them, and I think we found out as a country that was not the case either. But
Yeah.
it's a challenge.
Tim worked extremely hard. We learned how to use Zoom.
Yeah, well,
It's become a way of life these days.
Yeah.
Previous to that, it didn't even exist.
yeah.
And of course I followed Tim and because of some changes from the time I entered the admin job to the time I was president was 12 years.
Right.
And Tim was the same. We had a 2-year window in there. We had an overlap but I think some of the things that and I'm not taking credit for any of it because there were people like Gary Dietrich who was really involved in the initiation of the foundation. But we had to find a way to fund this stuff. And you take the dues that people pay, whether it's associates and or regular membership and high school membership. There's no way to fund the needs that we have.
Yeah.
And so we developed under those guys, and I give Gary Dietrich and Terrell McCombs and Hollingsworth a ton of credit because they established a foundation, which, and we've had some tremendous support externally, internally, associates at every level. We've had success, and, we're trying to build that foundation to $100 million. And when we do, we have the revenue that we get off of that foundation funds, and it funds our passion, our people, our growth, our operations, but more importantly, the investment in tomorrow.
Absolutely. And the ability for us to implement the mission that drives us becomes that much bigger.
And we encourage any and everybody to help.
Absolutely.
Because it's the people's responsibility for tomorrow, for their children and grandchildren. That's what I take serious.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what do you think are the greatest opportunities and challenges we as an organization and in the hunting and conservation community? Oh yeah, I know I'm throwing some juicies out in these questions.
Can I read the paper in the morning first?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it changes daily on that. But that means that what we have to do, we have to be a lot more adaptive and nimble. So from your view as a past president and being involved for a long time with the organization. What can we do as a club?
Well, you're the expert.
I'm like, so, yeah, I don't think you talk to my kids. I'm not expert at anything. I think trying to, first and foremost, you got to work. Every day has a new curve in the road. I have a plaque on my wall in my office says, the curve in the road's not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn, which is real true.
That is a very, very good statement.
Decisions made around the globe affect tomorrow when it comes to the club.
Mhm.
Our vision is to make sure that the wildlife we have not only exists, but they accelerate through time.
Mhm.
And I think that, managing decisions, whether it be local and or statewide and or national decisions politically, have a huge impact. I think just as much making people understand that tomorrow's not guaranteed for us. It's certainly not guaranteed for wildlife.
Right.
And so I think the club members are very focused on it. I think our AWCP partners at all level are very focused on this. I think there's room to grow there between working together as a unit, even though we all enjoy our own identity. And I think that stands to be important. But I think the rest of that is, and the biggest issue is put your ego aside and let's focus on the goal.
Yep.
And that sometimes is a real challenge.
It's true
Yeah.
for everybody, for humans in general. So, what about you, Steve?
No, totally. I totally agree. Jim makes some very good points, and I really couldn't offer anything anymore. I mean, it's very. This guy is a kind of
He's kind of a profound,
he's in a
profound thinker.
together. Oh yeah.
I think the work with youth is something that we've all got to do a better job.
Yep.
If you go look at kids today, and you talk podcasts, they understand what it is. Even I'm not really sure. But what? Yeah.
Sure. You listen to it?
I think the work that we've done, thanks to some great donors in the past, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say names, but Tim Hickson and Ed Rasmussen and,
Oh my.
and many others. You know them better than I. You were around in the early years, but I'm not as old as you are. Oh, hey, but anyway, I think youth to me is probably something that every organization is and should be focused on.
Yeah.
Because we're making decisions for them.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part.
And keep.
I know what I enjoyed as a kid. And in the crazy part, when I was a kid, there's a lot of things I couldn't afford. My dad was a minister. It was what it was. That was okay.
Yeah.
Great. I didn't know I loved it. But I had the opportunity to be in open landscape and do some things that today kids can't do. I mean, in some parts of the world, like Montana's a great open land state. Texas is not. Texas is 95% practically. So it makes it challenging.
Yeah.
And so the economics of that really limits a lot of people.
No, that's an interesting point.
But I think we've got to be, and I think the work that we've done at our ranch accelerates that.
Yeah.
We got the Rasmussen Wildlife Center, which is a training center. We hold Boy Scout camps. We have shooting ranges, but there's other great organizations out there that address youth. And I think, again, that working together is really a huge issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, in closing, we've had a great conversation here. Hunting story. Tell me what your favorite or some very specific memorable hunt that you've been on, something that you just a fun with your family or something else.
Well, yes, with my family, again, our ranch in Oklahoma, had whitetail hunting there, and got 2 or 3. I've got photos in my office of my boys and me with the deer that I had shot, and so those are some great. When you involve your family in your hunts and so forth, that's probably the most memorable. I mean, there's other up in Alaska and northern British Columbia, but again, hunting
Close to home.
with at home with kids, that's the most memorable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What about you, Jim?
Well, I'd say, multiple stories. In the early years, the first deer was able to harvest was just a buck. Today, I would say, man, alive. That's going to look good when he grows up. Yeah. And in the day, he walked out, and I think that's the hardest part for anybody, and especially a young hunter, is, I'm sitting in a tree stand with a board in the middle of an oak tree, and I'm shooting at 150 yards with open sight 30-30, and I shoot my first deer. Not only did I shoot him, I didn't climb down the tree. I jumped out of the tree, and after my dad got through whipping on me, it was a different ballgame for being so foolish with a rifle. And I think that's another big thing we all got to learn. But, I grew up on the coast shooting ducks and geese with a double-barrel shotgun along with my grandfather, and I thought I was in heaven. And then all of a sudden, I had an uncle that lived in Fairbanks, Alaska, and he was doing a little bit of outfitting on the side, and I was able to go up there and go Brooks all sheep hunting, and I just fell in love with sheep hunting. I think I'm about 50 pounds overweight for sheep hunting today, but I was fortunate enough to take the Grand Slam of sheep, which it just kind of fell into place. It's not something that was ever a major target, but to me, the mountains were just something that's just, and it's one of those things that you sit up there and say, "Don't tell me there's no God." To me, those are some of the big things.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on, or something that you would like to close, or a closing thought?
No, but again, it's just where looking at when I became a member 85 and actually president in 92, 94, things have improved significantly, so much significantly since then. And it's just amazing. I mean, this guy here is a part of that. It just, again, it was the beginning. I say the beginning, but it was really the beginning with getting the ranch involved, and then the University of Montana, and all that was coming together when my presidential time, and things have just grown significantly since then. It's just fantastic.
That's you.
I know.
So I think that looking back at my pledge class, if you were used to a college term, I had about 4 presidents in it. It was myself, Bill Dimmer, Maury Stevens, and Tim Brady, and
Oh.
and all those guys are my mentors, if you will. And every president, before and or after, all the way going back to sitting in room with, I'm in the room with Jack Parker, who was chairman of General Electric, going, "Wow, I better keep my mouth shut and sit in the corner." And those guys, and I learned every step of the way. And I said the run to presidency was about a 10 or 12-year run if you get right down to it, and it's a learning experience every day.
Yeah.
It's a monumental time commitment, and I'm not complaining because, and all the things I've done in my life, that probably to me has been one of the biggest things I've ever been awarded with. So, all that being said, I think if you look through the stages where, the development of the foundation, the university program's expansion, the ranch, and how we've utilized the ranch, more importantly, with Luke and his online deal, I think the COVID, for lack, I know it was a horrid time for everybody, but it really taught us how to expand that because we focused on online stuff. And at that point in time, that's all people had.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, it's just growing and growing and growing. And our team has done a fabulous job of that. And of course, you couldn't ask for a more committed staff. They're not here for the money. They're here for labor for love. That's really what I'd say.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well,
Thank you.
gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you guys. We appreciate the history, and thanks for taking the time to be on the Boone and Crockett Club's Heritage of the Hunt.
It's been an honor.
Take care.